Welcome back to Royals Weekly. I am your host, Marcus Mead, and joining me as always, the inspiration behind Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, my brother Mike.
I am not afraid to pull a weave or to gouge some 50-year-old Mormon lady's eyes out if I have to. Okay?
To get what you want, to get the respect you deserve.
That's
I'll
right.
tell you what. I love the notion that it's Salt Lake City's the least known and least popular of the franchise. I have to imagine. I know nothing, but what's weird is my partner only watches the Salt Lake City one. I don't know why.
Oh, yeah?
I don't know why that one's particularly appealing to her, but that's the only one she watches, and it's like I don't get why all these people why Salt Lake City was the place we had to go,
there's probably something real practical behind it. Like the cost of shooting in Salt Lake City is super low.
Because really, you can find a group of people who are fame seeking anywhere. So
50-year-old fame seeking divorcees are like,
you can find those.
I guess,
those are
can they not be divorced to be on that? Because they have to be housewives.
No, they're housewives. I'm guessing. I don't know. I guess. I have no idea. But you can find those in Piedmont, North Dakota if you want to. So,
Hey, Real Housewives of Piedmont's going to be a banger, baby.
Coming next season. On this week's episode, we'll discuss what was a rough week on the field for the Royals, interesting trades off the field, and how the Royals might fare in this week's slate of games. Mike, what do you do to cope with poor Royals play?
I take all my coping advice from Bluto in the movie Animal House, right? You know, he looks at the guy and he says,
that great philosopher Bluto. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I recommend you start drinking heavily. That's kind of where I've always leaned on it, And so, that tends to be my go-to. It's not always my go-to, but sometimes it's my go-to. No way.
That makes it rough to be a Royals fan. Your liver's like, boy, I wish he was more like a Braves or a Yankees
I wish he was
or
a Dodgers fan. Maybe we'd be okay.
Oh well. Just send the Royals your next bill, your next doctor's bill, and be like, this is on you guys. We'll start talking about the past week with the same things we always talk about for the past week, and that's the roster news. There was a ton of it this last week. People coming in, going out, getting hurt, all this sort of stuff. I want to start with the really interesting, I guess it's not roster news per se. Oh, it's a little bit of roster news. Andrew Benintendi was traded to the New York Yankees for three pitching prospects. That happened earlier last week, but it's still like the headline thing from last week. We were calling for Benintendi to be traded in last week's episode, Mike. Benintendi, Michael A. Taylor, and Whit Merrifield. Those were the three guys we identified as necessary trades at this trade deadline. The Royals got pitchers T.J. Sikkema, Beck Way, and Chandler Champlain. Sikkema, a 24-year-old left-handed pitcher, pitched in college at Mizzou. Beck Way, some people think that Beck Way is like the centerpiece of this trade. It's not really clear whether it's Sikkema or Beck Way. I have my own opinions on this. He's a 22-year-old right-handed pitcher, tall, projectable guy. And then Chandler Champlain seems kind of like a throw-in lottery ticket, 22-year-old at low A when they got him anyway. Right-handed pitcher, big, tall, big body guy. What do you think of this trade, Mike? Do you like the return? How are you feeling about the trade for those three particular prospects?
Yeah, first off, the centerpiece thing doesn't really matter, but who you like of those two probably depends on more how much you value ceiling versus floor kind of stuff. Beck Way probably has a higher ceiling than what TJ Sikkema does. Sikkema is probably the more reliable prospect in a lot of people's eyes. I didn't dislike the trade. I think the value that they got back is probably what you're going to get for 6 months or less than 6 months of Andrew Benintendi. Sikkema I like a little bit because he's got pretty good control so far. He does have one pretty good pitch in his kind of slurvy slider. I've heard some people call it a curveball. Some people call it a slider. I think of it more of as a slider because it's a real big sweep to it. But he doesn't throw very hard. His fastball's probably not going to play up unless he does something with it or he controls it really, really well. So I don't know that there's a real high ceiling there, but you should, and I think you mentioned this on One Royal Way this week, it'll be very interesting to see how he does in AA and AAA as you start to find guys who maybe will lay off some of that off-speed stuff and try and focus it on his fastball. But I do like him. And then Beck Way is one of those guys where you're always like, well, he can become a reliever if you need him to, right? If you need him to, he throws hard enough, and there's probably still some velocity in there. But yeah, TJ Sikkema does have some injury history as well, so that's a little concerning. But overall, I thought that was the value one. Usually I would say go with one quality prospect versus 3 longer shot guys, 3 lower level guys. I would have preferred maybe one guy who's a more advanced guy through the minors already, but that's not what the Royals are doing. I understand why the Royals might not want to do that because their system needs depth in pitching no matter what. If this ends up being the only trade they make, their system needs pitching, a lot of it. And so maybe they were like, okay, let's go with the depth versus, and maybe the Yankees just weren't willing to give up one of those guys. For example, like you get 3 guys here who are in the Yankees system between 15 and 30, right? I think is where pretty much all of them were. Would you have rather had one guy between, say, 8 and 12, right? That's what I would go with, the guy between 8 and 12 versus the 3 guys between 15 and 30.
Right, but you do have to understand, and I think people need to understand that teams on the other side of these trades know that, and they would rather hang on to those guys as well. If you're like, hey, we have this one prospect who we think it's a 60% chance makes it to the major leagues and is a contributor, and we have these 3 guys who each one is about a 20% chance, they're going to stick with the 60% chance guy because it does no good to have 3 dudes who only ever become AAA players or quad A players or something like that. Those guys are pretty much useless. And so you'd much rather have the one guy who you think has a better chance of making it to the major leagues and contributing. Now, these 3 guys, I like Sycamore as, in my mind, he would be the centerpiece of this trade for me. Now, again, you're right. It doesn't matter who you consider the centerpiece of the trade. I like Sycamore because I watched some film on him and I saw a dude who has really good command, a dude who has 2 really good secondary pitches in his changeup and his slider. The slider is interesting because sometimes it looks like a curveball. So there are sometimes it looks like a cutter too. There are times when it's really hard to distinguish between it and what might be a curveball. And he doesn't really throw a curveball, but sometimes he'll throw his slider with more depth and is slower. And so it's just one of those things where
and from different arm angles sometimes too. So
it's a real.
The guy is kind of funky.
Yeah, he's a funky deception lefty, and he does that because he doesn't throw very hard, right? 89, 91 on that fastball is not going to – he gets some swing and misses on the fastball still, but that's mostly because he places it up in the zone really well. He gets guys' timing thrown off with that changeup and slider, and then he sneaks a fastball by him up top. That's fine. I think unless he adds velocity in some way, he's always going to have to be a guy who – has a real even pitch mix or, leans heavily on his secondaries. He can't be a fastball dominant pitcher. He just doesn't throw hard enough. And so, but a guy like Chris Bubich with a lot better command in my mind. And if he can hold on to that really good command, there's something about the Royals system that just makes them start walking people. I don't know what it is, but I hope he avoids it because whatever they're putting in the water that makes people walk people, I hope he brings his own water to games or something, because if he can avoid that, if he can keep that good command, I think he'll be a very serviceable major league rotation piece, and that's all you're really looking for. That's all you need him to be. And so, yeah, I like Sycamore a lot. Beckway, I think, has probably a lower percentage chance of getting to the majors, but like you said, also probably a higher ceiling on him. Or at least that,
unless he's a reliever, he's got
at least as a
chance.
rotation piece. Sorry, as a rotation piece, he has less of a chance to make it in Major League Baseball. But there is still projection in him. He, looks like he could put on some muscle. He definitely looks like he could fill out a little bit more, throw a little bit harder. And if you keep refining those secondary pitches and that command, who knows? Beckway could be a piece that ultimately sticks in a rotation and has a pretty high ceiling. The Royals have shown no ability to develop those things in starting pitchers, so we'll see. But maybe they change their pitching development regime and things change. I like the trade because they got what they needed to get, which is starting pitching. And so hopefully they keep focusing on that as they move forward and try and trade other pieces like Whit Merrifield and Michael A. Taylor. We'll see on that one. The other sort of big roster news of the week is that Salvador Perez came back off the IL and started playing again this week. He started in this Yankee series here. It was a little fast. It was a lot faster than they said it would be. They said initially it would be a 6 to 8 week injury. He came back in 4 weeks. We know the Royals have a history of rushing guys back. I'm a little worried that he's back. I know he's played well since he came back. Mike, how do you feel about the notion of Salvador Perez being back?
This reminds me of that, I don't know if it's like a GIF or whatever from The Simpsons where Mark McGuire steps up and Bart Simpson's like, hey, what about steroids? He's like, hey, who wants to talk about that? Instead, who wants to see some dingers? That's like, nobody wants to talk about Salvador Perez and the fact that he came back too soon because he's already started hitting jacks, including the one that won him the game today. What do you mean came back too soon? He's fine. And they've always said with him, he's been a guy who gets injured, but they've always said he comes back sooner. I have no idea if there's any medical evidence that actually supports that, or if he just comes back still kind of hurt and plays anyway. I don't know.
Which of those sounds more likely? He's a medical marvel, or he just always comes back before he should, and sometimes it backfires, and sometimes it doesn't, that's probably how it works.
Yeah. No comment on that one. Just keep hitting dingers. Okay. It was good to see him do that though, because even before, I guess right before he got hurt, he was doing a little bit better, but he struggled this year. The times he's been in, he's mostly struggled, and we need him hitting dingers. We need it. And so we need, last year Salvador Perez back and doing those things, because the guys in front of him are going to be on base more. The guys around him are going to help produce more. We really need his big bat in the middle. And he still catches a great game, although it's not what it used to be. It's still the best option we have behind the plate, honestly. So, it was good to see him hit.
Hopefully he stays in the lineup, stays healthy, can be that power bat that he used to be. Because you're right, the lineup around him is now a lot better than it was last year. And so if he gets a chance to hit balls out of the ballpark with guys on base like he did today, when he hit that 3-run home run to take the lead in this end of the Yankee series, then he's a very valuable guy. I hope that that's the case. I hope that he stays healthy, but I still worry, man, because how often can a dude just always, come back early from injury? It seems unlikely that that's the case, but we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he is a medical marvel. Another guy.
He's Hayden Panettiere from that show.
He's the cheerleader. He's the cheerleader.
Thank you.
He's the cheerleader for his teammates.
Save the cheerleader, save the world.
While Perez came off the IL, a couple other guys went on it, or at least Angel Zerpa, was brought up to start against. Who did he start against? The Angels. Yeah, we went to that game. Starting the Angels series.
Yeah.
Pitched pretty well for about 4 innings and then ended up leaving with a leg injury. He was placed on the 15-day IL with that hurt leg, so obviously he was out. Eventually, John Heasley came back from the injured list, made 1 start, and then he was optioned to AAA, and Carlos Hernandez was brought up from AAA. So there's been a lot of movement in that starting rotation, a lot of shell games going on. Heasley did not look great in his start. I mean, he looked healthy again. He was throwing the ball hard, didn't get a lot of help from his defense or his offense or really anybody. But, it was good to see him at least get back in the rotation, look healthy, throw hard again. Emmanuel Rivera was also optioned to AAA, despite the fact that he's been hitting really well lately. He was optioned to AAA in part because they refused to put Bobby Witt Jr. on the injured list. He hurt his hamstring in that game in the Angels, one of the games in the Angels series, I think. And instead of putting him on the IL, they just kept him active. I guess because they thought he would come back sooner. He rested for about 5 or 6 days. They've been DHing him the last few days. I think it's clear that he's actually not fully healthy. That's why they're not playing him at shortstop. And so I don't know what the hell they're doing.
Yeah, watching him try and leg one of those out. He just
doesn't look the same. And I'm like, why would you ever do this to your most valuable commodity? Why would you ever not let him just heal fully? Just put him on the 10-day. Even if he's there a couple extra days, what does it matter? It doesn't matter. Get him fully healthy. They're going to play games with his health. Terrible idea, but hey, they don't pay me to make these mistakes. They pay Mike Matheny to do it. On the field was not a great week this week, which we kind of knew it wouldn't be. We knew that the Yankee series was going to be really tough. We kind of expected them to do well in the Angel series. They didn't really. They went 2-5 this week, which brings their overall record to 40-62. They did have some strong performances this week. I thought Brady Singer pitched really well. Mike, tell us how that went in his amazing outing against, who was it? It was against the Yankees.
It was against the Yankees in that ballpark, against that lineup. It now seems like he can be the guy to build around in this rotation. Now, if you take it by itself, it's fantastic. 7 innings pitched, 1 hit, 0 earned runs, 10 strikeouts, and 1 walk. But coming off the last performance he had, where he struck out 12 and looked fantastic as well, he looks like he has taken a step forward. And part of that is because of the changeup usage that you and I have talked about a lot. He's throwing his changeup about 10% of the time, which is not a lot, and it's not a great pitch, but it's enough right now. But his command has taken a step forward, it looks like, especially with his two-seamer. And the two-seamer was unreal in that Yankees game. It was so good to see. And if you can, he's not probably ever going to be an ace, as they kind of say in Major League Baseball. He'll have his ups and downs, but he looks like the kind of guy you can really lean on in a rotation as far as, movement of pitches, seems to stay somewhat healthy. If he doesn't get into his own head and implode, he's the kind of guy you want to build around, because he made that lineup look silly, look really bad. So that's the best lineup.
It's a good lineup, but it's not the best lineup.
Unbelievable week.
The Dodgers
are
the best lineup in baseball. Yeah.
Well, who is the Dodgers? I mean, they have the MVP. They've got guys that can all put it out of the park.
Here's the thing about Singer that I think is something we could consider at least, and that is that what if the changeup is actually helping him with his command? And here's why that might be the case. Previously, you would see him pitch, and you knew he had 2 pitches, and you knew that he knew the batter knew he only had 2 pitches, and you would see him on the mound sort of trying to be really fine with his slider or his two-seamer, because he knew that those guys knew one of those 2 was coming, that they were sitting on a pitch from him. It seems like all of this has sort of taken a burden off of his mind, and he feels like guys aren't anticipating the pitches he's going to throw at this point. That will actually encourage you to put the ball in the strike zone more, to be less fine with your command. And if you're trying to be less fine, you're actually more spot on with that command. And so I think part of this is just like a psychological relief for him to like let it off his mind and say, like, I can just go out there and pitch, throw two-seamers, throw sliders, throw changeups when necessary, but I know guys aren't just going to be sitting on these 1 pitches that I have. And it's just really, really helping him tremendously. It's great to see him have the command to really go out and dominate. The last 2 starts, he hasn't needed the changeup very much. I'm of the mind that he should throw it a little bit more than he does currently, but that can wait till next season too, as he sort of refines that changeup in the offseason. It has taken a step forward. It was probably a 40 grade pitch when he came back up to the major leagues. I'd say it's about a 45 grade pitch right now. If he can bring it to 50 grade in the offseason, look out. We have a new pitcher on our hands. And you're right, he could really be the bedrock on which this foundation is built. And I like that. I'm talking about another pitcher this week, a guy who in the bullpen who has really been resurgent as of late. That is Taylor Clark. He went 2 innings this week, almost maybe he went both of those today. Yeah, went both today. And he just really shut down that Yankees lineup in the 8th and 9th to get the Royals their only win of this Yankees series. 2 innings, 1 hit, 1 strikeout. I'm really giving it to Clark this week because 1, there weren't a ton of standout performances this week, and 2, it's a cumulative award. He's pitched really well lately, and I really attribute it to the fact that he has 3 pitches that he can use effectively as a reliever. I think that's huge for him. His changeup, first off, he throws like 98. His changeup goes like 91 or 90, which is really interesting, but it has enough movement. He locates it well enough, and then he throws his good slider in there. Those are 3 pitches, and it's, again, hitters can't just sit on whatever pitch is working that day if you throw 3 of them. Okay. And that's been huge for him. I think he was getting away from it earlier in the year where he was just kind of trying to lean only on his fastball and slider. Now he's mixing that changeup in more. I think it's really working out for him. Great to see Taylor Clark. They might move him in the next couple of days. He's a candidate, I think, to be traded.
That was my thought.
He's a candidate.
We haven't talked about him
honestly,
a lot, but
I think they're certainly getting calls about him.
The
question is, do they want to move him or not? Makes sense to move him. He was on a 1-year deal, I think, so might as well move him if he's being effective. Maybe you see him packaged with Whit Merrifield or Michael A. Taylor. That'd be nice. But whatever happens, I think good on him for rebounding after a rough stretch there earlier in the year. Another guy who's been on some rough stretch, at least in the last 7 days. Mike, tell us about a hitter who makes a little bit of money and is not really pulling his weight this week.
Well, Hunter Dozier had a rough week. He did hit the home run today, but he went 2 for 22 with 2 home runs and 5 strikeouts and no walks. And Hunter Dozier, because he plays a substandard defense, he played third today. And the part of the game that I saw, he played okay. He played pretty well at third, but he'll never be the guy that's going to get to a lot of balls. He'll never be a defensive asset anywhere you play him, really. Maybe at first, but probably not even there. And so he's got to hit. And 2 for 22 doesn't cut it when it comes to that. Especially when you think of the guys in your lineup, he's one of the most expensive.
He's not the most expensive.
The most. Well, I'm sure Salvy's more
probably
expensive.
Close.
But
I'm not exactly sure. But he's one of the more expensive.
I'm not even sure. But he makes more than a lot of the other guys. So We need him to hit more. It just has to be done, and that doesn't even take into account like is he a guy you would trade? He just has to hit more if he's going to get at bats more.
Question is who would take that contract? Who would say like we'll take on this dude? And it's not he doesn't make a ton of money, but he makes way more money than his value, and teams don't want to take that on. Yeah, especially because
and his production. Yeah,
there's no projection for him. He's 31 years old. He's never going to get any better defensively. He's probably never going to get any better offensively. This is what he is. And the Royals paid too much for it, frankly. And now they're kind of just stuck with that contract. I think you really got to transition him to a bench player once you get somebody like Michael Massey up. Once there's just not any room for him left in this lineup, make him a bench player for you. Let him hit against lefties sometimes, and that's it, because they just have way too many of his type of guy, like first base DH type, who can only hit maybe a 750 OPS. That's not going to cut it for you, and he just doesn't provide enough value defensively.
Yeah, and it hurts him a lot that Nick Pratto and MJ Melendez can both play the outfield better than he can.
Not that it helped. I mean, they were always going to be the preferred choice anyway because they're younger. There's more, projection in their bats. There's more ceiling for them as hitters. And so, yeah, that was always going to be the case in some way. I'm talking about another guy who doesn't have much ceiling left, and that's Whit Merrifield. He's my weak performer for the week, right when we needed him to kind of not be a weak performer, to shine for us so we can start sending him to another team. Whit comes out and goes 5 for 28. He does have 3 doubles, but 2 walks and 4 strikeouts. He also made a key defensive mistake in that third Yankees game. Ball bounced right off his glove. And so not a great week for Whit. Hopefully they're shopping him to other teams. Hopefully the Dodgers are interested, the Braves are interested. Whoever wants a second baseman or outfielder, Brewers, whoever. Hopefully Whit Merrifield is on next week when we're doing our show. Hopefully Whit Merrifield cannot be the weak performer because I think his time should be up here in Kansas City. I think they should get whatever they can for him. I'm not even the type of person who's like, oh, if they're not getting value, if they're not getting his value, they should just let the deal go. Nope, not at this point. At this point, they take the best offer they can for him because after this year, it's over for him. Like you're getting nothing next year, and so just let it go. Let it go. Get what you can and move on.
Yeah, and I mean honestly, I don't want to say like he's earned it because I don't know that guys really can do that, but has he? If there's been a guy in the last 6 years other than Salvador Perez who's earned the opportunity, and Salvi played on those teams that were great, that's earned the opportunity to play in the postseason, it's been Whit Merrifield. Send him to a team where he can play in the postseason, and before he's done, because he may be, he may be.
You got to imagine he will be. Years, I mean, he doesn't have the type of approach that allows some players or hit the ball hard enough, or have the approach that allows some players to play deep into their 30s. He's not going to take a lot of walks. His bat is only going to slow down from where it is. I think and his legs are going to slow down too. So he's going to lose value as a defender and as an outfielder as well. So, the clock is ticking for Merrifield. If he wants to play playoff baseball, they got to get rid of him. I'm talking about something that has really frustrated me for my theme this week. Watching that Yankee series, watching that Angels series, all I could think to myself is the little things aren't little. They aren't so little. Watch that Yankee series, and you see a team that was leading in the second game going into the 8th, made a bunch of defensive mistakes and cost themselves the game. Made 3 errors in that third game that really just ended it for them. You can't make these mistakes. Base running mistakes, defensive mistakes. You cannot make these mistakes. They're not catching the ball, throwing the ball. These aren't the little things. They're the things that make you win or lose. Salvador Perez, MJ Melendez sails balls over the third baseman's head. Michael Garcia, I have no friggin' clue what he was doing on that pop-up. Did you see that? Did you see that play? Oh, my Lord. Oh, yeah, we were sitting right next to each other. He drops this ball that's like right in his glove because I don't know what he's doing. Like reading the New York Times, watching his – I have no clue what he's doing. But he's just sitting there. The ball pops right out of his glove. And I'm like, what the – now, I'm not super surprised. If you've watched Garcia in the minors, you know that he has lapses in focus. He sometimes doesn't make the routine plays he should make. That stuff can't happen. If you're going to be the Royals, if you're going to try and compete against a team like the Yankees, that cannot happen. And so I know,
especially for a guy like him, he's a glove first guy
to be making mistakes.
That's his thing. I've heard a lot of people like He looks okay offensively because he's hit some singles in this series. He looks okay offensively, but I don't know if he's going to be good defensively.
It's supposed to be.
That's his thing.
But I'll tell you, he's one of those guys who slick fielding, good range, doesn't necessarily make every play that he should. And so he needs to get on top of that. But generally speaking, the Royals just need to be a lot better at doing those little things. Consistency. You cannot make those kinds of mistakes and plan to beat teams like the Yankees. They're too good. They're too talented. You give them an extra out, they're going to put a ball out of the ballpark. You give them an extra 90 feet, they're going to drive that run in. You can't make these kinds of mistakes because every time you do that, you give them an out on the base path, whatever, you're just nailing your own coffin.
Yeah, and mine's getting somewhat of a negative theme as well this week, and it's too little too late. And that applies to several different things. That last win in the Yankee series was too little too late to save a good week for the Royals. But the thing that really kind of does this for me is something I brought up on Twitter today, and that's this. We're going to go into the last few days before the trade deadline here. And what we don't really talk about, what you and I have never talked about, is the longer you wait to trade those guys, the less valuable they become for a lot of reasons. We've talked about a couple of them. One we haven't mentioned is new teams are going to start realizing they want to be sellers. And as more players get added to the trade market, that will make your players less valuable because there are now alternatives, right? So if you're trying to trade Whit Merrifield and this team needs a second baseman, well, now that the Giants and the Red Sox are selling players, you're competing with those players that can play second base on the Red Sox and the Giants. So by waiting and constantly doing that, it's going to be too little too late. So if we end up trading Whit, you have to know whatever value we get back is less than what we could have last week. Okay. And so we've talked about how waiting for, half a season or a season or 2 or 3 seasons to trade guys minimizes their value. So does waiting here at the end. And so that I just wanted to bring that up because you're going to see guys from the Red Sox and the Giants get dealt.
Yeah,
and we're going to be holding on to guys, and it's going to be
fathom how the Royals could get to this point where they would let that happen. They could have traded Benintendi a month and a half ago. They could have traded Michael A. Taylor anytime in the last month. Whit Merrifield anytime in the last month. Yes, it would have meant playing guys like Michael Massey or backup guys who or maybe even like Brewer Hicklin and guys who you don't really project to be major league regulars or whatever. It doesn't matter. You're already out of contention. Sign some bullshit free agent, some guy off the streets to come play second base for you. It doesn't matter because you're getting the most out of the value that you have if you trade those guys before the market gets flooded with second basemen or outfielders or whatever. It's one of those things where Dayton Moore doesn't realize he's shooting himself in the foot, or maybe it's J.J. Piccolo. I don't know. Whatever the Royals don't realize that they're shooting themselves in the foot. You heard that statement from J.J. Piccolo when he was like, hey, we're happy. Our guys, all the guys we have left have more than 1 year left on their contract. We'll hold on to them if we don't get what we want. Well, that's just the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Like, what are you saying? Are you trying to be standoffish? Are you trying to be big time?
Yeah. I think
they don't, though.
I think that's what they have to say. I think that's what they have to say.
They have to say it, but
I think they think they have to say that. I think they think
like,
hey, we'll hold these.
They're the Polish hostage.
We'll do it. We'll hold them.
They're just like, we will do this. We will give ourselves
don't you threaten
no value.
me
We don't
to hold these guys.
And so it's like it's nuts, right? Like it's just what they could say. They could say nothing. That's always an option they never choose to take. It's like you could just keep your mouth shut. That's the option. Why do you never choose that option? Oh. It's crazy to me, but you know what? Good on you. We'll see if they end up trading Merrifield. It is Sunday, July 31st at 7:30 p.m. They have 2 days, not even 2 full days. They have
2 days,
almost 2 days to trade Whit Merrifield, Michael A. Taylor, or we're calling this a failed trade deadline. We'll see.
That's a threat.
We'll call it failed.
We'll call it failed.
It's really important to us that you subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on whatever platform you use. That's YouTube, Podbean, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Overcast. Name them. If you use it, subscribe, rate, and review us in whatever way you can. Subscribing, rating, and reviewing helps more people find the show and lets us know that we're doing something right and you want us to produce more content. Plus, Mike gets all of his self-esteem from our subscriber numbers, so help him out. Help him feel better. He's got a rough life. He's got a kid who cries all the time. He's a teacher, so he's got to deal with other kids. Hey, shut up. We're trying to get people to subscribe.
He doesn't
He's got
cry
to deal
all
with
the
these
time.
14-year-olds all the time at school. It's rough. We need some subscriber numbers. So come on, smash that subscribe button. It's free. It takes about half a second, but it helps us tremendously. Make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as well. We post a ton of additional analysis, commentary. We live tweet a lot of games and get real snarky and post GIFs and stuff. It's a lot of fun. Join us on all those sorts of platforms and learn more about the Royals from us, or just have fun, being snarky with us.
I'm going to come over there and smack you. You call my kid Cryy again, all right? I will crawl through this
In
computer
this week's
screen.
Spotlight segment, it's time to look at a group that has frustrated and puzzled many Royals fans the entire season, the starting rotation. We're going to talk about them today. Why? Because they've been pretty good since the middle of June. Led by a resurgent Brady Singer, the Royals staff has been 9th overall in ERA in the last month and a half at 3.84. Their fielding independent pitching has been roughly middle of the pack at 4.17. And their walk rate is still super high. It's still last in the league, but their strikeout rate is 17th, and their ground ball rate, 44.3%, is good enough for 10th in the league. Mike, I guess the question that really comes to mind here is, how long should Cal Eldred's extension be? What are we thinking? 5 years?
Don't do that. Don't you dare do
Lifetime?
that, okay? Lifetime? No. So none of these. Here's the thing that gets me about that. Like, okay, maybe you even give Cal Eldred credit for some of the steps forward, for Bubic looking a little bit better with his fastball command, for Singer becoming a new guy since coming back. Those guys have been here.
Why were they doing it
for a
last
while.
year?
Like, why weren't they doing that in April then? Okay, so this. Yeah, and no, you can't be like, hey, well, he gets a lot of credit here for this resurgent Brady Singer. We had to send him back to AAA. Like, no, that's not happening. So yeah, I'm not starting the Cal Eldred continuation.
Yeah, the Royals, I'm sure,
which I don't think
want us to
anybody
push
else is
that
either,
narrative,
except for maybe the Royals.
Which is interesting because we are, I think, at this point past the point of no return with Cal Eldred. Like, there's just no way you could look at what's happened and be like, good pitching. Turns out he was a good pitching coach all along. No, that's nuts. Like, even if you say, well, you can't say this because I don't think it's even close to true. But even if you say he's the one responsible for making Brady Singer what he's been, he's the one responsible for Chris Bubic getting a little bit better, he's the one for Brad Keller stabilizing. Even if you could say that, you would then also have to say that it took him this long, and that is inexcusable. It's inexcusable as a pitching coach. It cannot take you that long. If it takes you that long, you're screwed all the time. So he still has to lose his job under that sort of logic. I'm going to put logic in quotes there because it's insane. But I hear some people sort of, I'm also just waiting for that. There's sometimes like that.
Because it's not logical.
There's some people out there who will defend the team no matter what they do. Like, they're sort of like, and I get it. Good on you. I guess you're a true supporter, but they will defend them tooth and nail. Like, you're not allowed to say anything bad about it. See, Cal Eldred is doing great. It's like, I don't know what you're seeing, but okay. So I just wanted to anticipate that and be like, listen, doesn't matter. He still deserves to lose his job, honestly. Seriously though, let's dig into actual stuff about the rotation. Why do you think the rotation has improved from earlier this year? Okay, that's
seriously.
fair.
If a guy's going to get credit, Dane Johnson gets the credit, because Brady Singer went down, worked on the changeup, got better, came back up, and was a different pitcher. Chris Bubic went down and came back up and looked a little bit better. Those are the two reasons why. And I guess Brad Keller has stepped up just a little bit, but he's still really inconsistent. Those two guys are the reason the rotation has looked better. But I think. And I think we'll kind of get to this in the next question, but I think what that means, what you can look at, what you can kind of squint and see then, is a rotation that may not be as far away as we think it is. And I'll get into that a little bit more later, but it might be that we're not
Dane
super
Johnson
far away, but I think Dane Johnson should get some
I think
credit
if we
for
look
that
at like
stuff.
why that's taking place, the overall numbers are shifting, I think primarily because Singer has come back and has looked dominant. So 1 out of every 5 spots in your rotation has now taken a giant step forward in terms of the numbers anyway. Chris Bubic has taken a little step forward, so that's 2 spots in your rotation that look a little bit better. Greinke has gotten, that's 40% of your rotation, right? Like Keller has stabilized a little bit.
40% of your rotation
one.
right there.
Greinke was hurt there for that stretch, and that was always really tough on the Royals because they're cycling through 6th and 7th starters who spend most of their time in Omaha. Like it's been tough in that regard. But when he's come back, now he looks a little more stabilized. They've just stabilized in some ways that make sense. Singer's the only one we could say looks like he's taken a significant step forward. Bubic, the book is still out. The walk numbers haven't gotten that much better for Bubic, and so that is what scares me. And the strikeout numbers have just not been that good all year. And so if you're still not striking out that many guys and walking too many guys, I wonder, like, will the home run rates come back to normal? And he starts, the numbers then start looking less good. I'm still not sold on Bubic's resurgence here. But it is nice to see that Singer's taken the large step forward and things have stabilized at least a little bit. The question I think we really got to look at, and the thing that's really holding this rotation back still, why are they still walking so many people? Like, that is the thing. They're still dead last in walks. And, while they've made a little bit of progress, it's the one thing that is really holding them back.
Yeah. So here's the bad thing. I don't know. Okay. But the much worse thing is obviously they don't know either. Like, and that's really the issue there, right? I can have my speculation. I think it's because a lot of their starting rotation has marginal stuff. They're not fantastic. Brad Keller's stuff is marginal. At this point, Zach Greinke's stuff is probably a little below average. Chris Bubic's stuff is marginal. He's got 1+ pitch in the changeup. Other than Brady Singer in their rotation, their stuff is pretty meh. And so when you have it that way, you don't like to challenge guys in the zone. And when you don't like to challenge guys in the zone, you walk people. And that's just how it goes. Because when you start challenging them in the zone, you miss by a little bit, it's gone. And so, I think that's it. And then I think a lack of understanding what to do when you are up in the count allows a lot of guys back into at-bats. And then that means if you allow, that's more of a numbers game. If you allow guys to get to 3-ball counts, you're going to walk guys. And so they're allowing way too many guys to go from 0-2 to 3-2 and 1-2 to 3-2 and not putting away hitters. And that maybe goes back to marginal stuff as well. But those are kind of the couple reasons that I think. But they don't really know. That's the real issue. They don't understand why they're walking guys. Or they don't understand.
Yeah, we know that for sure. Otherwise, they would have.
They're not
fixed
fixing
it.
It's
like
not really
they've been walking guys ever since Cal Eldred became pitching coach, and so it's not a coincidence that every time somebody like John Heasley is the perfect example. It is not a coincidence that John Heasley had a walk rate under 2 walks per 9 innings in AAA this year, came up to the majors, and then it was over 4 guys per 9 innings. That is not a coincidence. It cannot be a coincidence. Statistically speaking, it cannot be a coincidence that every guy who gets into the major leagues for the Royals has a fairly low walk rate in AAA, and then boom, it explodes when he gets to the major leagues. Happens every single time. And so that has to be related to something that either is different about Major League hitting, and it could be a stuff thing. Their stuff doesn't play as well in the major leagues, so they're shyer about throwing it in the zone. But we can also say, coaching staff-wise, they don't know how to prepare guys to face guys who will lay off their stuff outside the zone or whatever. They're just not good enough at convincing their own guys to throw strikes at the very least, right? I think part of this is strategy too, right? Like, so you talk about having a guy like there's some guys you can throw. You should be confident throwing the ball right in the strike zone, even right down the middle of the plate. So we saw Brady Singer in his last outing. I watched an at bat of his, or that he was throwing to a guy, and what was interesting is Joey Gallo. That's who it was. Joey Gallo. He's facing Joey Gallo. He gets down 3-0 against Joey Gallo. What does he do? He just starts feeding him sliders and like 2-seamers right down Broadway. Why would you do that? Because it's Joey Gallo. He's hitting like 190. Like, one of the things that they don't do Yeah. And guess what he did in that at bat? He got down 3-0.
He consistently
got back
strikes
into the
out
count with
the most
fastballs
in
and
the
sliders
league,
right
like-
down Broadway, and then struck him out. Like, that's what he did, right? And look at the key example of the Royals doing this in my mind is Brett Phillips in that Tampa Bay series. Brett Phillips was hitting 154 coming into the Tampa Bay series and then walked 3 times in the first 2 games.
Yeah.
Inexcusable. You should be throwing balls right down the middle to him if you have to. But they don't understand the strategy of like when to be more comfortable with the heart of the strike zone, because there is a time for it, and they really need to understand better that you can't be walking 9 hitters. You can't be walking Brett Phillipses of the world.
Agreed. And so you just gave me a great thought. So I went and
I think
looked real quick.
2018.
Since
Okay.
I don't know when Cal Eldred started being the pitching coach, but since 2019. Okay. Well, from 2019, 2020, 2021, the Royals, and this year, the Royals have only not been in the bottom 5 in
Yeah.
walk rate one time. And they were like bottom 12. and that was the 2020, the shortened season. And so
that's a trend.
It's
trend.
consistent. That's not
Yeah.
a coincidence.
Looking-
That's a trend.
Looking,
Okay, that's exactly.
Everybody knows it. Nobody cares.
Yeah,
Apparently.
wild stuff. Man.
Looking forward, though, I mean, you watch the games, like you got to know. Looking forward, Mike, what do you see as the next step for this rotation? We know that, they're going to be a key issue going into 2023. They have about, we'll call it a month and a half left or maybe like 2 months, August, September. They have 2 months left to sort of work on stuff. What do you see as the next step for them moving forward?
So this is where I get some optimism for the rotation. And I talked about it a little bit earlier. I think Brady Singer is the guy you build around. Okay? You have the opportunity here. He looks like he's taking a step forward. Imagine if the Royals can just get one other guy from their system to take a step forward and become the level of a Brady Singer. Maybe it's Daniel Lynch. Okay? Maybe it's somebody else. Maybe it's Jonathan Bolin or I don't know. Somebody else in their
TJ
system.
Sycamore.
There's not a lot of guys to choose from. So maybe it's
Although
Drew Parrish.
he's a little
Maybe he
further
comes up and
away,
shows
but
you
whatever.
something. I don't know. Maybe it's TJ. Probably not TJ Sycamore, but maybe. I don't know. So one guy. Maybe it's Daniel. I'm hoping it's Daniel Lynch. If you can get him to that where Brady Singer is right now, you're pretty much there as far as building a rotation. And here's why. You feel like you have the guys in, whether it's Bubich or Keller or Heasley or whatever, who can fill out that 4 and 5 spot. Now you go out and you trade for some of that young minor league hitting that you have in excess of. You go out and you trade for another top level starter. Okay. Whether, for us, it was James Shields when Shields came in, he was kind of the starting block. Well, now you do it the other way. You've got these guys who are 2 and 3 starters in Brady Singer and Daniel Lynch. Go out and find another guy that can match that. And your rotation's in not just a good spot, it's in a great spot. And so that's a pretty good rotation. You won't have any depth. We just don't have that right now. We don't have the number of guys in the high minors that can be effective at the major league level to have depth. But you'll have a decent starting pitch,
Right, and it doesn't
rotation
have to be
that if
by
they can
trade,
stay
right?
healthy,
They could
can help you
sign
compete for a playoff.
a legit starting pitcher because they won't have other big contracts on their books. Carlos Santana was making $10.5 million. Mm-hmm. He's gone. Andrew Benintendi was making a decent amount of money because he was in his final year of arbitration. They don't have a ton of large contracts. Whit Merrifield's contract might be gone soon, hopefully. And so they won't have a lot of big contracts on their books. They can afford to go out and pay somebody $20 million a year to come in and be a starting pitcher for them for a few years. And, until Bobby Witt Jr. hits free agency or something like that, they can afford to do that if they choose to do so.
Or more likely, you go out and you get some guy like Carlos Rodon did with the White Sox last year, who's maybe coming off an injury but has shown in the past that they can be an elite level starter. So you're getting them for a little cheaper on a prove it deal, maybe like a 2-year deal, and then they hit and boom, you're great. You now have a solid rotation. That's more of a Royals move in my mind. I don't think they're ever going to pay a starter that $20 million a year.
They might have
Maybe
teams
they do.
just do not trade.
But
useful starting pitching
something like
anymore.
that.
It just doesn't happen because it's just so valuable. It's too valuable that you don't have the prospect package normally that could get those guys. And I don't know that the Royals have it right now either. And so, trading maybe if you can find a way to do that, great. But signing is also an option. Go out there and get that. And I think you're right. It is about the rest of this next step for this rotation is about identifying guys who can be in that starting rotation. But I'm thinking even more about like, what shape does the rotation take? Do you remember those Twins teams of the Johan Santana and Francisco Liriano years? Right. What they did. Mm-hmm. Right. What they did was they developed pitchers to throw strikes.
Brad Radke was at the beginning of that.
They essentially developed a bunch of mid and back of the rotation guys, and then they would have one or two horses, like dominant pitchers. So they had Santana, they had Liriano, they had, guys who were big time ace guys. But one of the big philosophical things about their team was we're going to have strike throwers. So even if, you're not a great stuff guy, you're going to throw strikes and you're going to sort of, be a decent mid back guy, back of the rotation guy. The Royals seem poised to do something like that. They got a lot of guys who were candidates for mid to back of the rotation guys. Bubic, Heasley, even Lynch, if he doesn't ever become the next Brady Singer or whatever. Keller is that already. They have a lot of those guys. Fine.
Keller really
be those guys. They got Singer. He's probably better than that. He's a number 2, maybe at his best. Then you go out, trade or sign for the guy who, needs to be your number 1. That seems like really the model for them right now because they just don't have the kind of advanced pitching development to get a number 1, to make their own number 1s.
Here's the issue, though. The issue with that is those guys that you're talking about as those back of the rotation
they're
guys
not for the Royals.
Are not necessarily strike throwers.
For the Royals, they're not.
It's not the same thing. So what you end up having, is like this. Okay, this guy's a back of the rotation guy. He looks great in one start. Walks the world
using
and gets
that Twins
clubbed.
Model.
And is out in the second inning in other starts. Like, you can't have that. The Twins model was this guy's 5 innings every single time, So, yeah, maybe that means that those guys aren't staying. Now, Heasley has been a guy who can throw strikes and should be able to do that. Keller should be able to do that. Bubic, I don't know if he'll improve that or not. We haven't really seen that consistently at the major league level. But, yeah, I agree. I think that's a good idea. That goes back to our talk we've had on identity. What kind of pitchers are you signing and drafting?
And that probably means getting different pitching development.
They have to have the identity
to make them to pump out consistent strike throwers because right now they just don't have that. Even in the minor league level, just really bad when it comes to throwing quality strikes at the very least. The Royals start this week off in the Windy City with a 3-game series against the comically underperforming Chicago White Sox, which you hate to see. Isn't that just the worst? Before heading back home for a 4-game set against the also comically underperforming Boston Red Sox. There's something about teams being named after laundry. It's like leading to a mediocre baseball. I don't know what it is, but Mike, tell us about the fighting Tony La Russas in the Windy City.
Do your sock laundry. Let's go. They're going to strap up their adult diaper, have a few too many glasses of wine, and then go driving around.
Don't do it.
That is a joke, okay? Drinking and driving is very serious. Don't laugh at that, okay? Stop doing it, Tony La Russa. All right? So the Chicago White Sox are 51-50. They're third in the American League Central. Not really where we thought that they would be. In that first game, we're going to see Brad Keller versus who has really been their best guy, Michael Kopech, or as I like to think of him, Patrick Mahomes' high school nemesis. Okay. And so he's a real hard thrower, started in the bullpen for him last year, 3.16 ERA, a 1.21 whip. He averages 95 on that fastball with a slider and a curveball as well. He throws the fastball a lot because it's a good pitch at 62%, but he also walks a lot of guys. So he's the kind of pitcher I think that this lineup actually matches up pretty well against because now that we have some of those young guys up, they're going to take a lot better at bats. So we may see a few walks in that game from the Royals lineup. Let's get him out of the game early. Singer will be in that next game against Lucas Giolito, a guy we've seen quite a bit of who just a couple years ago was on the Cy Young radar, but is having just a really bad year at 5.14 for the ERA and a 1.48 whip. His fastball's lost some velocity. It's only at 93 now. slider and changeup. The changeup used to be his out pitch, his go-to pitch.
Oh, yeah.
But he's gone away from it some. It used to be like if you're ranking top 5 changeups in baseball, guys used to talk about it. But he's gone away from it a little bit to lean on the slider a little bit more, and the slider is not very good. So somebody needs to have a sit-down with old Lucas Giolito. And then in that last game, it's Chris Brubich versus Lance Lynn, 35-year-old Lance Lynn out of Ole Miss, 6.42 ERA on Lance Lynn. 1.36 whip. He's a 4-pitch guy with a fastball, cutter, 5 pitches, slider, curveball, and changeup. He mixes it a lot. Uses his fastball and cutter the most, but he's been hurt some this year. He's been hurt some throughout his career. A long career, was with the Cardinals for a really long time. So we'll see what they can give him.
You're talking a stretch of what?
That's lining up to be a pretty good matchup for the Royals.
Keller, Singer, Bubich is really probably the heart of their rotation at this point, right? And so should be able to take a couple of those games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll see on that one.
And we're not sure if Daniel Lynch will come off for later.
Are leaving town in Chicago. I'll be actually heading to Chicago as they're sort of leaving. I think I'm just missing a Chicago White Sox Royals game in Chicago. I'm going to Chicago next week. So next week's episode I'll be coming live from a hotel in Chicago, but from a filthy, seedy motel in Chicago. But after that, they'll head to the Royals seedy motel in Chicago. Boston Red Sox. They are 51-52, which is good enough for last in the AL East. I think they're 18.5 games back. Yeah, that's last. Everybody else is above 500. The Orioles
that's
included.
Last.
And so that's why Mike was talking about some teams are realizing they need to be sellers. The Boston Red Sox are one of them. And so they've been underperforming on offense and in the starting rotation. A lot of people thought they were going to challenge for the AL East this year because they had a good year last year unexpectedly. They sort of come back to earth this year. They have a pretty shallow lineup, a lot like the Angels do. Even the Yankees, I think, to some degree, have a little bit of a shallow lineup. They got 4 or 5 really good hitters and then a few guys. But this lineup is shallow with Xander Bogaerts and Rafael Devers, who's hurt right now. They've been hitting pretty well. But then guys like Trevor Story, who they got in the offseason and thought was going to be really good for them. He's only got a 94 OPS plus, so he's been below Major League average this year. Bobby Dalbec is not hitting. It's just not great for them offensively. And so also not great for them in the rotation. Some guys they were really counting on have had pretty mediocre years. Nathan Eovaldi, Nick Pivetta, they've been meh. Michael Wacha's been really good for them, but he's on the 15-day IL right now. So they're coming in and they're not playing real well lately. I think everybody probably saw, if you pay attention to baseball, you probably saw this comedy game that they ended up losing by 20 runs or something. I don't know. They lost 21 to something. They had guys in the outfield just doing this, where's the ball? I don't know. It was like a real circus act in Boston there for at least a game or two. So their fan base is a little demoralized. Let's make them even more demoralized when they leave Kansas City, having lost 4 games to the Kansas City Royals. Let's end this week's episode the way we end every week. Mike, what do you say? With it just a bit outside. I love routine, man. I love it. And so, we're going to end this week like we do all the time.
Routine is important.
About something outside the world of baseball that interests us. Mike, tell us about your world outside of baseball.
My world's all about the end of summer, man. So the end of summer transition is coming. I'm an educator, so we're getting ready to start up with school again. I'm actually going to go to my new school for the very first time tomorrow. So, and you and I are going to meet up there on Tuesday. So it's going to be a little bit wild as we end this transition. So this is always a weird time of year for me as I'm starting up teaching, but it's also a weird time in sports because
for the Royals, it's been winding down for a month.
Not winding down. We're getting into the playoff race, but for the Royals, a lot of times that doesn't matter. And so, but football season is now starting up, and you and I are both gigantic football fans as well. So it's like you're trying to pay attention to what's going on in baseball, but you also have this football stuff you want to look at. The weather's starting to change. It won't change probably till closer to the end of August, but that'll start happening. And it's just it's always the most, I don't know, transient is not the word I'm looking for, but the most mercurial time of year for me. It's always it's one of the busiest, and it's just so wild. August is always the wildest month for me. So you're anticipating football starting, and baseball season is you're looking at young guys and stuff like that. and then you're starting school and all this crazy stuff's going on. So
maybe listen
take
to
a
some
minute,
Royals
take a
Weekly
deep
or
breath.
some YouTube
August
content
is going to get wild.
Weekly, you know, that'll help calm you down in these trying times.
Yeah.
Actually, mine just a bit outside actually meshes with yours really well. I think actually this week, mine is more of an idea or a concept, less than like a thing. And mine is be gracious with yourself. And so a lot of times what I do for a living is I work with writers, graduate writers, to make their writing better. And sometimes the writers that I work with are really interested in like punishing themselves or being hard on themselves because they haven't written enough, or because they think their writing isn't good enough, or because, you know, one thing or another has happened and they want to punish themselves. And nothing good ever comes of that, I find. And so, you know, I also have like friends or my partner or something like that, who will sometimes just be, you know, unforgiving to themselves because they did something wrong, or they didn't go to the gym today, or they didn't eat right today, or they didn't do this or that or the other. And it's like, just be gracious with yourself. Show yourself some grace, because whether or not you think psychologically you deserve it doesn't really matter, right? Like, what matters is that being gracious with yourself is going to make you feel better. It's going to make you ultimately more productive in some way. Nobody ever like punished themselves and then really like got a lot out of it. They were like, oh, I'm such a piece of shit. And then they were like, oh, and that made me go to the gym later. You know, like, it doesn't work that way. Like,
I showed myself
if you're unhappy
there.
with yourself, if you're not treating yourself well, it doesn't have benefits. It's not like, oh, if I just punish myself enough, then I'll go to the gym, or I'll study an extra hour, or I'll do that work I was supposed to do. Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
I'll
be
put that
gracious with
McDouble
yourself.
down.
You know, tell yourself that, you know, it's okay that you did this thing today. You needed it for mental reasons, or like, you know, be gracious with yourself in ways that allow you to, you know, set new goals, or, you know, recommit to something later. I think showing ourselves that level of grace, I think if we were honest, we would say, well, we would want other people to show themselves that level of grace. Why don't I? You know, like, you know, I have a friend who I tell her all the time, like, if you were talking to a friend and you heard them saying that about themselves, wouldn't you tell them to be more gracious with themselves? So why don't you be more gracious with yourself? Like, and so just my friendly bit of advice from a decrepit old man who's lived a few years on this earth, just be gracious with yourself, especially as we move into transition time, as we're moving back into the school year, or we're moving back into whatever. Like, if you're going to go to work tomorrow, Monday morning, be gracious with yourself.
Yeah.
But also be gracious with the Royals, because they're trying their best. You know, they're trying their hardest-ish. I will not be gracious if they do not trade Whit Merrifield and Michael A. Taylor. I will be furious. Unforgiving. And I don't have the capacity. To be vicious. But, I will not be happy if they do not trade those two guys.
Unforgiving.
We'll check back in next week, and hopefully we're talking about a Whit Merrifield trade and a Michael A. Taylor trade. We'll talk about the Royals and all they did this week. Until then, be good to each other.